We're spending 22 minutes today with Padma Lakshmi, the author of a brand new book, The Encyclopedia of Spices and Herbs. A gorgeous, gorgeous book. The photography is amazing.
Thank you.
And Padma, I want to start with this quote that you have. Just as a good sorceress needs her book of spells, so too does a good cook need a compendium of seasonings. It's so true. Do people not realize that when they cook, how important the spices are?
I do think they realize it, because even if you're not somebody who uses spices a lot, you know how just adding salt, which is the most basic but important seasoning to a dish, affects that dish and how much it changes. And I think people are really intimidated by spices. I think people want to use them. And so really that's what this book is about. It's about demystifying spices. It's about having just some place to go to with a very clear-cut explanation of where the spice comes from, what dishes is it used in, how is it used, what are the flavor profiles, you know, what is the botanical name, what is its place in history. But we wanted to do that without also making this like a really heavy book or a coffee table book. I want it to be used and dog-eared and, you know, something that people will take on trips or take with them to the spice market.
Yeah, it is a good size. It's not an intimidating encyclopedia. As far as spices go, what I wonder when I cook is, like, when do you throw out the spices? That seems to be somewhat controversial.
No, that's a really good question. I always encourage people to buy spices in small quantities. You know, I know we can buy everything in bulk, but really, are you going to go through that, you know, 7-inch tall canister of oregano? Probably not.
No, my Costco cinnamon jug.
I mean, no offense to Costco or some of those bigger box stores, but you don't need it unless you're cooking for an army of 400. I would say buy no more than 3 ounces at a time. And spices are light, right? Unless they're peppercorns, which are a little higher in density. But I would say generally toss them out every 6 months to a year, depending on how often you open it. And also, another way to make your spices last longer is to dry roast them just for 2 or 3 minutes in a hot pan. You just take a skillet of any kind, just put it on your stovetop on medium or medium-high heat, and whether it's cumin or black peppercorn or cinnamon sticks, just, you know, toss them in the pan and stir them around, and then put them in your mortar and pestle and just grind up what you need. You will see the difference immediately. Like within 5 minutes of doing this, it will take you 5 minutes from end to end. You'll be like, wow, I've never smelled cumin this fragrant. And it'll revolutionize your food. It will be so aromatic and fragrant and fresh. You will never want to go back to store-bought, you know, cumin powder.
No more Stop and Shop for me. And you did this in conjunction with, and help me out with the pronunciation of the store that you visited as a little girl.
Sure. This is a store in New York City in Manhattan called Kalustyan's.
Kalustyan's, okay.
It is a wonderful store for many generations of immigrants in New York City. It is a mecca. It is the only place that carried a lot of our native foods and spices and ingredients. It's been around since 1942. I grew up in that store as a young child, you know, like a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, running around through the aisles. Of course, then the store was much, much smaller. The address is really easy. It's 123 Lexington Avenue, which I remember. And, you know, when I traveled, you know, I grew up between India and America, and so I relied heavily on the women in my family in India to help me if I didn't understand a spice, or I went on some modeling trip and brought back some funky seed or something, and I wanted to know how to use it. But after I was in the States, Kalustyan also became a place that was almost like a second family, you know, culinarily or food-wise. And so I would often call them and say, you know, I was in Marrakesh and I found this leaf and it doesn't seem like a bay leaf. And, you know, now of course you can take a picture of anything. But in those days, they were so helpful to me. And they had asked me to do a cookbook with them for about a decade. And I really didn't know how to do that, because I said, you know, just put your stickers on my other cookbooks, because they were literally born out of the things I bought in that store. And then I thought, you know, I always wanted a book like this. I love spices. I always wanted a place where I could look something up. I love cookbooks. I love beautiful cookbooks with great photography. I read them cover to cover. And even if I may never follow a recipe, I use them a lot for inspiration. And so I thought this would be a good book. There was nothing really as comprehensive as this.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. You know, it's a daunting experience to call something that you're writing an encyclopedia. But, you know, I had help. I also had the great Judith Sutton, who was an editor here in New York, who really did some of the heavy lifting and made sure I was on track, and helped me with research immensely. And, you know, I cannot, that's why her name is on the cover too. You know, I don't think I could have done this book without a steady and, you know, just experienced hand. She's edited and written, you know, countless amount of books for all different kinds of chefs. And this one, it was wonderful to collaborate with her on.
Do you think chefs nowadays, and even the average cooks, do you think that they are more adventurous when it comes to using spices? I feel like when I eat in a restaurant, I see more interesting combinations, like a lavender ice cream or something that years ago you just wouldn't have seen that sort of thing.
I think they are, and I think that's because the American palate is much more adventurous. We are really, really experimental as eaters, and one of the reasons that that is so is because we have such a robust immigrant culture. And I sincerely, for one, hope that that doesn't change. You know, I grew up here in the city. I am an immigrant and a child of the city, and I went to school elbow to elbow with Chinese kids and Filipino kids and Puerto Rican kids, and I ate at their houses and they ate at mine, and I think that's what kind of makes this country great for a whole host of reasons other than food. But I think that's why American chefs are so adventurous, because they're exposed to things and they know that the American palate is very accepting. I mean, the fastest growing condiment today in America is not ketchup, it's hot sauce.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, you know, we are seeing all kinds of things like mashed potatoes, which are as American as apple pie, having ingredients like wasabi. You know, you remember that craze of wasabi mashed potatoes?
Sure. We just had a story the other day about the hot sauce being used at a fast food chain.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Chipotle, which is just a smoked jalapeno. There's a whole restaurant chain or fast food chain now that is, you know, named after this pretty, until 10 or 15 years ago, obscure Mexican smoked chili pepper.
Right.
You know?
right.
But and also I had other people who were looking over my shoulder, like mentioning, I was just talking about the chilies. You know, the chili section is the largest section in the book, and I had the great Diana Kennedy, who I sent the manuscript to, and I said, can you just make sure I'm not talking out of my butt? And she said, well, kiddo, you are kind of, but let me, you know, it's wonderful to get.
But that's okay.
Yeah, it's wonderful to get these long emails from, you know, these sort of grand dames of the food world. And that's what I love about working on a book like this. You get to touch so many different kinds of cuisine and meet so many wonderful people. And you know, it was a humbling experience to do this book. It was very daunting. I wanted to get it right. I was nervous about it. I still wake up sometimes and like, I forgot, you know, X spice. But so far, I'm sure we'll have another, you know, revision when when we get information. And
the paperback version, you can add a few more spices.
Yeah.
Let's talk Top Chef, and you have a new season coming up. And this one, you're bringing back some of the chefs from previous seasons. How's that going to work?
I mean, I think it works really well. I've already filmed the season.
Right.
And it starts. Let's see, it starts in a couple of weeks on December 1st.
Right.
And we have new chefs from all over the country, and then we brought half of them are alumni from different seasons. And I think it's interesting because, A, it rewards the long-term Top Chef fan. They've already got a history, whether they like or hate or whatever the particular chef who's coming back. They already have an opinion. And in a lot of ways, for me, it was wonderful to see how those chefs had evolved or not. You know, over all these years. And so, you know, at first people were like, oh, well, is that fair? And I said, you know, there are athletes that compete in the Olympics more than one time, so it's the same principle.
Right.
You still have to cook on that day. You know, you're only as good as your last meal.
Right. Now, where did you come up with your catchphrase, please pack your knives and go?
You know, those catchphrases, I think, just bubble up. I was involved in the development of Top Chef and in the talks about what it was going to look like. And then I had gone to film a movie for the BBC. And so they did the first season with another host. And I don't remember talking about that phrase when I was meeting with them. But when I saw the first season, that was already in there. So I just kept it. I mean, it was different. You know, they had made some changes to the second season, but it's just been there from day one, because every chef carries their own knife kit.
Okay.
And so when you're leaving, you take your knives with you. You know, so take your toys and go.
Take them and go. Take your marbles and leave the playground.
Please. I say please.
You do? Okay, all right. That makes it okay. Now, I have to ask, I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, when you're doing a show like that, how many calories do you consume? I mean, does it, or do you just like sample a little bit here and there? And
well, I try to sample. In fact, my costume designer on the show is always like, take smaller bites, take smaller, because, you know, I expand. Oh, yeah. I mean, I gain probably 2 or 3 dress sizes, 15 pounds. So I'll go through 3 dress sizes. That's why, you know, you don't notice it as much, because I have a wizard named Albert Mendonça, who's a lovely man, and he buys dresses for me in different sizes, because I'm consuming, especially in the first half of the season when we have like 17 or 19 chefs.
And how long is the season? I'm trying to get a timeline here for this expansion.
In TV time, it takes, you know, 14 weeks. But we film it very, very intensely for 6 weeks. Okay. So it's a lot of wear and tear, because you're gaining 15 pounds in a very short amount of time, which is really unhealthy, obviously. But I consume about 7,000 to 8,000 calories a day. In the first half of filming. Then as the chefs, you know, get booted off to the second season, when there's only 10 or 5, it's a little easier. But it's not like having that 4th portion of lasagna, which I have done on my own time, by the way. It's, you know, having the lasagna and then having pig's feet and then having Chateaubriand and having, you know, foie gras and all of that. And each of those dishes. Oh, yeah. And each of those dishes has at least 20 ingredients, you know, in them, like duck fat or bacon. They don't care about my waistline. They just want to win. And they should. That's what they should be doing. That's what I would do. So I just give my body a pass to just do my job well, get as much sleep as I can, which isn't easy, and eat what I have to eat to do my job. I mean, I probably take 2, maybe 3 bites of each dish, so I'm not eating a lot, but you know, 3 or 2 times 19 is still 40 or 60, so it's a lot of food, and it's just a high-class price to pay.
And then what do you do after, when you're done and you say, oh, okay, like I'm a little bit bigger size now?
I work out a lot.
You go hit the gym.
Oh, yeah. I spend at least an hour, sometimes 2 hours, 6 days a week. You know, I box, I jump rope, I do the speed bag, I do spinning, I go up and down stairs. If I have time toward the second half of the season, I do that in whatever hotel I'm in. Because you can always find an emergency staircase somewhere, so you can't say, oh, I carry a jump rope in my luggage.
And do you eat very boring during the off season, like steamed vegetables and everything? That's got to be hard for somebody who loves food and who's such a good cook.
It is hard, but that's what this book is about. The one thing that you can do that's healthy and that will make you eat and reach for more healthy foods is incorporate spices and herbs, because they don't have any calories, they're shelf stable, they don't cost a lot of money, and they will last in your pantry for a while. You don't have to refrigerate them. So if you're having something like what you're saying, steamed vegetables and a nice but boring piece of fish, you know, and some brown rice, I know, snore. But the best way to make that into something glamorous and fabulous and flavor-filled is to use spices, and that's what I do. I mean, that's really, really what I do. I don't eat a lot of red meat. I don't eat a lot of flour. I don't eat a lot of dairy except for cottage cheese and yogurt. I don't eat any sweets. I don't drink any alcohol, which is probably the hardest, and I don't, or maybe this one, and I don't eat any fried foods. So what it takes me about 6 weeks to gain, and then we go back and do the finale for another 2 weeks, so 8 weeks total, but I have a break in there. It takes me probably double, 12 to 16 weeks to lose. You know, because it's easy to put on weight. But and I also want to lose it in a healthy way. I don't have portion control, and I once tried the Atkins diet for, I want to say, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, and I got really irritable. And so I need to eat. I need my tummy to feel satiated, and so the only way to do that is by cooking with spices. Because think about it. Spices and seasonings are what give a dish its character. Right? Otherwise, it's just fish and vegetables, either cooked as fajitas or cooked as a Thai curry, or cooked in a Mediterranean style, or, you know, cooked French or Chinese. Those ingredients, those proteins, those vegetables, those starches are usually ubiquitous in different cultures. But depending on what seasonings and spices you use, you can change those ingredients and change the whole character and dish of what you're eating.
Right. So this is obviously your first encyclopedia
Yes,
of
I don't know
spices.
how many more encyclopedias I have in me.
But not your first book. And Easy Exotic was the book that kind of put you on the map. And then there was a lot of talk this past spring about love, loss, and what we ate, your memoir. A lot of talk about your marriage to Salman Rushdie. Was there anything in all of the coverage of that you felt somehow got lost or misinterpreted?
Oh yeah, lots. I mean, I would say, and I'm glad you asked me because it's a local New York newspaper and it gives me a chance to address it, which I never have before. But, you know, I would say 3 or 4 days before the book came out, I think the Daily News got an early copy, which, you know, probably wasn't that hard to do because I'm sure bookstores were shelving it or stocking it. And they did the most cynical, inaccurate synopsis of it, and in one case said a line that was the exact opposite of the line I said, which was right in the paragraph below what they were quoting out of context. And that was very difficult for me because, you know, I poured my heart out into this book. I wanted to do a book that was honest and raw and meant something, that it wasn't some fluff piece. And so I...
What was it that they misconstrued?
Well, of course, you know, you even mentioned it. The juiciest part that everyone wants to know about was my marriage. And I understand that. You know, I was married to a very famous person, and so I get that it's juicy, you know. But that's only 2 out of, you know, 17 or 19 chapters of the book. And if that's all that anyone's reading the book for, they don't have to read very far because it happens and then it's quickly disposed of, you know, and we actually get to the rest of the book, which is, you know, the most, like what the book is actually about. But they just were very cynical. They made it seem like I was much more rude or negative about my ex-husband than I actually was. I mean, I believe I was very balanced, and so does the New York Times, the Times of London, and the Times of India, all who did very comprehensive literary pieces on the book, and said, you know, she was actually quite even-handed and whatever. So, like, because that was the first thing and people hadn't had a chance to read the book yet, it was very painful for me.
Those will be the things that make the headlines. And for him, I would think, as sort of the poster guy for First Amendment speech, he had to kind of be okay with you writing it. But was he really okay with it, or was it?
I mean, I can't tell you. He knew I was writing it, and I think he was very supportive. And I kept making sure, you know. And he said, "Look, you have a right to tell your story as you see fit." And he also wrote a memoir, you know, a few years before I published mine, and that was difficult for me. And I do think, you know, to every marriage there are probably 3 sides, not just 2. But it was painful for me because I know that Salman saw that, and you know, I still really care about my ex-stepchildren, if that's what you call them, you know. And so all of it was very painful because I really wanted him to actually just read the book and not, I didn't want anybody to read that first piece because it was so misconstrued and like sort of in big caps, you know. I mean, you and I can probably write those cynical headlines ourselves. You know, it's actually like a parlor game that I sometimes play with my girlfriends, you know. But that's, you know, that is the double-edged sword of being a person in the world and
being 2 authors.
Yeah,
I
think so. But also putting yourself out there. You know, I've also had a lot of opportunity because of being on TV. And, you know, my book probably had a better chance of being read than some other author who probably did just as beautiful of a book, but maybe she didn't have a show. So you know, I have to have great humility and remember that I have a lot of good things and opportunities in my life that have helped me. So I shouldn't protest too much.
Right,
You know,
right.
I'm an adult, and I knew it was taking a risk to write that book. It was important for me to do a serious, good book that women and men could relate to, whether you were an immigrant, whether you had ever felt like an outsider, whether you felt like you didn't belong because of the color of your skin or the nature of where you came from or any of that. And I think I spent 5 years writing that book, and it was probably, other than having my child, the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I'm very proud of that book. And I think that once people read that book, I think people really did respond well and gave me a fair chance. And I am happy overall with the reception of all my books, but specifically of the memoir and the encyclopedia. I can't ask for more.
In the encyclopedia, you dedicated to your little girl.
Yes.
Do you two cook together?
We cook every day together. If you go on my Instagram, you will see proof of this. Yeah. She's a really good cook, and one of the first things that I allowed her to do was to grind spices, because there are no knives or fire, right? So she has a little wooden kitchen right at the end of my counter. And that was first put there just to keep her hands busy, and so, you know, she had her own dishes and everything. And I had a little tiny mortar and pestle that someone, you know, a little white porcelain one that someone had bought me at Dean & DeLuca, but, you know, what I was afraid I was going to break it, so I put it in her kitchen because it was just Krishna-sized for her hands. And so, just so, you know, she's very smart, so she doesn't want play vegetables anymore or, you know, like things with Velcro. She wants real stuff. So she has real spaghetti that's broken up in a canister to use. She has real star of anise and cloves to pound. And she's really good now. Now she's like almost 7, you know.
Another chef in the making.
Yeah, and if anyone is listening and they have children, you know, someone who worked closely with me actually gave me a great idea. And there are 2 children's cookbooks that I encourage everyone to get this holiday season. One is the Silver Spoon Cookbook for Children.
Oh, I didn't know they had one for kids.
Yeah, it's really nice. In fact, we baked a marble cake just last week out of it. And then there's also another book called Stone Soup. But there's a great cookbook store in Manhattan called Kitchen Arts and Letters. And I love going to Kitchen Arts and Letters. You could get off, it's uptown off of Lexington. Just take the 6 train up there, and it's wonderful. And the guy who runs it is great, and it's a tiny store. It's floor-to-ceiling cookbooks from all over the world, and you lose yourself. If you like food, even if you don't cook, it's wonderful to go and discover those books. I love books, and I love cooking, so.
One of my daughters is a real foodie. We're going to have to check that out.
Yeah.
Last question for you, Padma. I asked this of a chef we had in some time ago. When you just don't feel like cooking anything, what's your like go-to snack in your fridge or in your cupboard? That's just something easy that you wouldn't think that a famous chef would eat.
Oh, I eat all kinds of funky stuff. So I'm equal opportunity omnivore. I'm just as excited about eating it per se as I am about a New York City hot dog, if it's a good New York City hot dog. But I think like I do just like plain yogurt and plain rice, like salted, you know, for us and Greeks and some Middle Eastern people, yogurt is also savory. It's not always sweet. So I just take yogurt and mix it with rice and salt and add some pepper and cucumber for something wholesome, because it's protein and it's starch.
Okay.
But if you don't want to do that, you know, I always rely on, if you like yogurt, rather than honey, I use maple syrup, because it's a little less cloying to me. But I will also do an egg in a hole. You know, a really easy, some people call that toad in a hole or whatever, which I love in a frying pan. I love frying pan toasted bread. And I'll do all kinds of things like that. I'll make a quesadilla. I've kicked the habit now, but for a few years I suffer from insomnia. I have since I was in 3rd grade. So I will always go and have my meals, but then I'll have that midnight or 2 a.m. snack. And there I usually have like all different kinds of funky grilled cheeses or quesadillas. Like I'll put marmalade and chili powder and cheddar cheese in one grilled cheese, and you just put butter on the outside, and you do it in a frying pan. You have to put it on medium heat with a lid, so it cooks and the cheese melts, and then you flip the bread, and the last 2 or 3 minutes, leave it uncovered so the bread gets crispy and it doesn't steam. But
this is too much for me in the middle of the night. I'd never be able to handle that.
Well, just stick a quesadilla in the microwave. I do that too. I do that too, you know.
Well, you can learn so much more about cooking and spices and herbs in the encyclopedia, but it's not too big.
No.
You can use it in your kitchen.
I didn't want a book that was supposed to make you less intimidated to be more intimidating about
No,
spices.
not intimidating at all. A beautiful book. And Padma, thank you so much for coming in
Thank
to
you.
speak with us.
It's nice to
Appreciate
meet
it.
you.